So we can now officially start. Hello, this is Thomas from the Center Leo Apostel. I'm happy to announce this new AI and Values talk that is part of a series of seminars we have organized at the Center Leo Apostel, which is part of the Free University of Brussels. This series of seminars has like the intention to create an interdisciplinary reflection on the impact of artificial intelligence in our future lives. So we call it AI and values. And when we talk about value, we mean value in a very general sense, so open sense. It's not just economic value, moral value, ethical value, or educational value. So there are many values to discuss in the future of AI. So having this in the horizon, we are bringing speakers from different backgrounds and different projects, let's say, participating in different projects. And now we have let's say, a high moment on the series because we are having a speaker coming from the US, who is part of a project that collaborates with the Center Leo Apostel for quite a while. And maybe you can also tell a little bit about the mission of the Human Energy Project, who act as sponsors of this activity as well. So we have to thank very deeply because without the support of Human Energies, this will not be happening. So thank you a lot for that. We want more of this. So it's great that it's happening. And it is happening as well at the Commons Hub in Brussels. The Commons Hub is a place that also co-sponsored this event because they allow us to make it here in very good conditions for us. So, and this place is a hub. It's in the middle, in the center of Brussels. For those online, you don't know, but we are like in an excellent spot of the city. And this place is meant to connect the commons, meaning everyone who has an interest in being connected with the others. So here you get an eclectic group of people like intellectuals or practitioners or artists. And actually, before this event, there was a meditation session here. So that tells you a little bit what the space is about. So now let me go to the speaker, who's Parham Pourdavood, cognitive neuroscientist and experienced researcher in all or many of the areas related to the foundations of AI. So many people currently are working in AI in a way that they apply what is the mainstream application of AI. And we are very happy to have Parham because he goes beyond the surface of the application of AI, and he looks at the foundations of it. We have had discussions the last 24 hours about it, and I'm really happy because it's covering not just the foundations at the technical level, but also philosophical foundations as well as cultural implications of what DNA can mean to our own understanding of what is to be a member of society, or what is to be a member or a participant of the evolutionary process of consciousness. So this talk is raising a lot of topics. So be ready for a trip, and which we are not gonna make it very technical because we know that there is a very open group of attendants with many perspectives. So I leave you now, Parham. We will have your talk, and then please keep your questions for the question session that comes after the talk. Unless it's a very urgent question, you can always, I guess, ask the speaker. But ideally, after the talk, we will have a question-answer session, and then we go on a little bit of a networking session afterwards to get to know each other and enjoy the beautiful moment that is about to happen. So thank you, Parham.
Well, thank you very much, Tomas, and thank you for having me and coming and joining this talk. It's great to be here with you in this beautiful city. And I want to thank CLEA and Thomas Velos for all their hard work in organizing this for months. And I'd like to also thank Sheila Hassel-Hughes and Human Energy for their ongoing support of my work to explore these ideas. So I'm part of an organization called Human Energy. It's a catalytic hub for catalyzing collective consciousness. And our mission is to make sure people realize that humanity is part of a bigger organization and a collective organization, and what implications that could have for culture and individuals, especially younger people, and their relationship with technology. Yeah, so and also feel free to ask questions middle of the talk as well. It's pretty informal. If anything comes up, you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me. So the title of the talk is LLMs as Instruments of Expression and Creativity DNA, and I'll explain what that means for humanity. And I want to thank my close collaborators, Michael Jacob and Terrence Deacon. We've published, not published it, but there's a preprint of some of these ideas that we've worked on. If you'd like to delve deeper into the argument, that's the link there. So living in California and all these tech companies around you, like you keep hearing all these talking points around AI. Robots are coming for our jobs. We're gonna get replaced. AI will surpass human intelligence. Wipes humanity. Machines will make us obsolete. It's gonna solve all the problems without us. It's just like the human brain. No, it's just the stochastic parrot. And we can't control it once it's unleashed. And it's gonna lead to singularity and transhumanism. And so you hear all this around AI, and working at the organization that I work with and tackling some of these ideas from different perspectives, you kind of get frustrated that these are the only talking points that are going around, and they're usually not that uplifting. It's usually depressing to think about this technology like this. So I'd like to just take a break from this space for a little bit and take a little bit of detour and talk about music. And I will come back to LLMs, don't worry. But I want to make sure that we understand the principles behind the idea, and as we will later find out that the principles are actually across many scales. So thinking about music, right? If you're a musician or not, making music always starts with you. It's a very embodied, physical, playful process of experimentation, innovation. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of change. We make mistakes. It's not this abstract thing on a piece of paper. Music, you embody music, and that's how you produce it. So it's a dynamic and living experience. And it's a cultural and collaborative process, symphonies, orchestras, bands, different cultures have their own music, and we learn from each other. There's this cultural exchange as well as individual exchange of what music is, and it requires active engagement and expression, creativity, a uniqueness of musicians and individuals matter. Um, but what's the problem with that? What's the problem with just live activity, just live dynamics? It's and I'm specifically talking about sheet music, for example. When you write down music, um, why do we do that? So, and what are some limitations of just embodied music? So it's really hard to record live activities and organize them. It's hard to store and transmit if you come up with a cool melody or a good symphony, and if you're like playing it in your head, or if you play it on the piano, it's hard to share that across time and space. In terms of sharing and storing, it's very limited. It's hard to come across other people's work and it's hard to remember what a musician did a few days ago and built on top of their work. Even though you enjoyed it, you can't quite become that creative with what you heard a couple of days ago. And it's hard to keep track of who did what. So there's this also that aspect of it. If you heard a nice melody, it's hard to say, oh, who did it. Um, so what I call it, that what happens then after we just keep creating music without any sort of organizational capacities, it leads to some sort of complexity bottleneck. And it's hard to become more complex, build more on top of what we're already doing, and it just plateaus that activity. So what do we do? What did society come up with? We invented the sheet music. And what is sheet music? It's really a form of externalization of living dynamics. It's a form of compression of living dynamics. And what I mean by externalization and compression is, let's say you're playing the piano, you came up with a very nice melody, but in order to have that music, you just have to play it, right? There's no way for you to store it somewhere. But if you come and write it down on a sheet of music, then you externalize your melody, your music, your harmony into this piece of paper. And also, why is it compression? Because live music is all about like experiential dimension, has timbre and pitch and frequency, all these aspects to it. But what is a sheet music? It just strips away all of that and gives you a bunch of squiggly lines and points on a piece of paper. So it's a compression of actual live dynamics, which is very profound, and it's externalized. You could put it on the shelf. You don't have to uh, play it. It's really easy to store and transmit once you externalize it. Easy to capture and organize. And also, it's a very efficient way of being creative, because I could get the sheet music and play it backward or create theme and variations on it because I'm seeing the output of my creativity on the paper. Or I could split the melody and attach it to different, like once it's externalized in that sheet music, it's easy to be creative with it in a very efficient way. But it would be hard to do with live music. I couldn't really do that if just music was playing. And also, you don't need to memorize as much. If that was a skill that was important before sheet music, that you need to memorize all your work during your life. So it's kind of lifts that mechanical aspect of living dynamics. So, and also the one thing that's important with music, sheet music, is let's say you're playing Bach's sonata. You're putting your own creativity into it because you're interpreting what Bach would have written back then, or any musician you're playing. So it also creates this dimension where um, it's creative process, because once you have the sheet music and you come across it, then you pour into your own interpretation and creativity onto this externalized form or medium. And also it could be a cool way of looking at your own work and learning from it that you couldn't really do if it was just live music. Because now you can see patterns. It could be like, oh, I recognize that melody up there has a very similar form to down there. So you could see things about your own work that you couldn't have come across if you didn't do this externalization. So just to wrap up this section, it opened up new ways of doing creative work. And we had to learn new skills as a result. We had to learn musical notation, sight reading, how to teach people with sheet music. So it took some reinvention of what music means. We couldn't just go about doing the things we did before. We need to adapt to a new way of creativity. and ultimately became a novel instrument of expression and creativity. But what are some limitations of doing music this way? Um, Again, you need to learn a new creative way of going about music. Um, Memory, stamina, skills like that diminish. And the map is not the territory. So there's a lack of context and intention behind the work. You can misinterpret what a musician thought about music. And also could have some sort of rigidness because probably the person that produced the music had a very flexible idea. It's like, okay, maybe the tempo could be this way or that way, or that ornamentation could be different. But once you come across it, it's really easy to just be rigid with it and not put your own creativity onto it. Um, and it's easy to regard the sheet music itself as intelligent and meaningful, even though really the musician was the intelligence behind it. So it's important to recognize that once we come across it, we are the ones that warming it up. We're the ones that bringing life into it again with our own aesthetics and creativity. So we fill in the gaps using our own emotions and context. So this is the whatever I just described. My argument is that it's a very common theme of life across many scales. So just to recap, the default mode of life is living physical dynamics. That's the default. This living complex dynamics, after a while, becomes hard to organize and manage. So it hits combinatorial catastrophes, decay. It's hard to build on top of that. So what do? We externalize it, we compress it in these efficient media, and as a way of durable learning and transmission. But once we do that, it's important not to take the map for the territory, um, and remember that still living dynamics is the primary mode of life. It opens up new possibilities for creativity and recombination of ideas. And it requires in new ways of creative expression. Again, you got to learn how to work with this new medium. And it opens up new efficient ways of collaboration because now you could give your sheet music to somebody else and they could build on top of it across the globe, across time. You're not really limited to the present. So now I'll give examples of where this process keeps happening. And if you think about it, writing is a very similar argument because for thousands of years, people just talked to each other. There was no writing, and that was the default mode of intellectual inquiry, communication. It was all verbal, oral. That was the default. And as you can imagine, the same argument. Then at some point, we said, okay, we can actually write some of this down. We figured out writing as this externalized compressed medium. And now it was easy to share, but required new ways of creativity. With writing, you can like combine things, go to library, take from two different genres and see if you can come up with a new theory. And going some of the map is not the territory. Once you come across a book, you still have to pour your own interpretation into it. Um, Opens up collaboration. You could share your books across time and space. But interestingly, you could think of writing back then when it came around, because now writing is such a trivial part of our lives. We take it for granted. But when writing was invented to share knowledge and to do intellectual work, the Greeks were actually kind of unsettled by it. They were they weren't quite sure if it's the right way to go about intellectual discussions and intellectual inquiry. So this is Plato um, quoting Socrates. If men learn this, it will implant forgetfulness in their souls. They will cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written, calling things to remembrance, no longer from within themselves, but by the means of externalized, missing that one last word. I think it's mediums. The Zoom thing. Manner, I guess. So this is interesting. This is Plato keeps going. They seem to talk to you as they were intelligent. That's how he describes writing. But if you ask them anything about what they say from a desire to be instructed, go on telling just the same thing forever. So it's interesting. They were talking about writing like it was AI. They seem to talk to you as they were intelligent. To us, that sounds kind of crazy. Why? Writing is just writing. Why would it be intelligent? So I will come back to this point. So we talked about writing, talked about music. Is there a similar principle in biology? So it's interesting. Whenever we talk about DNA and biology, we usually think about, oh, DNA is primary. It's DNA, RNA, protein. That's what life is. There's a code to life, and that code controls life. There's this blueprint that creates us. So the flow of evolution is from DNA to RNA to protein, and sort of like Richard Dawkins' selfish genes idea, we're just vehicles for genes to survive. That's our purpose. And this is kind of the established view of academia. I would love to do that. Is that better?
Actually, the minimize thing would just maybe you push the minimize
What was that?
in the box in the window with the camera. There's a minimize like a little the smallest of the four tools available. This one.
Well, the thing is, I can't see my mouse, so I don't know where the mouse is.
Yeah, well, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
sorry
all
about
good.
that. Yeah, I don't see the mouse there. So I'm inspired by the work of my colleague Terence Deacon. The way Terence Deacon is a neuroanthropologist and neuroscientist. So he in this paper, How Molecules Became Science, he argues that actually RNA and DNA, they're not the source of biological information. And we might need to actually reverse this central dogma of molecular biology. Um, so what does that mean? That sounds kind of counterintuitive because us with technology and computers, information and communication, we're habituated to think of information coming first. Information is primary, so DNA is the source of life. Um, so without getting too technical, and having the music and writing example as we talk about this, is that the default mode of life before DNA and RNA came around were physical live dynamics. The same way we talked about music, how you just create the music first without needing any code or sheet music. So origins of lives were proteins organically interacting with each other. So Terry has a sophisticated theory, I don't get into it, called autogenesis. But the argument is that life was already meaningful and embodied and complex, and things were happening before there was a code. Um, and this is where meaningful information is. So goal-directed, real-world interaction. And what happened was, without getting too technical, is that as a result of that, the same thing happened where you get into complexity bottlenecks. If that's what life does, it's limited to evolve from that. If all you have are complex interactions with proteins, so what happened was, um, there were these nucleotide polymers, which are the building blocks of RNA and DNA, and they started to attach to proteins and constraining protein living dynamics. And RNA structures that led to more efficient organizational capabilities were selected, and the records of these useful forms were stored in DNA. So what is the main message? I want to make sure we understand what happened here was that, again, there were live dynamics, complex dynamics, complexity bottleneck. So life experimented with a way to externalize that live dynamics. The same way music were compressed and externalized in the sheet music, life found a way to externalize dynamics onto code, like writing and sheet music. And that externalization and compression was DNA and RNA. So instead of saying DNA came first, code came first, RNA came first, the argument is that live dynamics was already happening, and RNA and DNA just came to help that, to make sure you can complexify, to make sure life doesn't just get stuck in a plateau and it can keep evolving. So again, DNA is not a blueprint or source of life. Is a compressed, externalized record of useful recipes for how to do life, for embodied dynamics. So the cells can better organize and express themselves. It also allows innovation. Think about mutations and duplications, recombinations. Like you hear a lot of these things when it comes to evolutionary biology. And if you think about it, that's way of life innovating and learning from itself to it can become complexify. So really, instead of thinking of DNA as the code of life, this selfish gene that dictates life, it's really an instrument for cells to be creative and express themselves. Um, so it now thinking about that way, you wouldn't call the DNA intelligent, right? The cells are intelligent. Living physical dynamics are still happening. And what happens during development is that cells come together and collaborate together, and they interpret the codes within the DNA to give them context and use them as recipes and tools to keep building complexity. So what is DNA really is just like jazz standards that stuck around and are printed in sheet music. Um, we were already playing an orchestra. We just found a way to organize the orchestra in these mini recipes, mini codes that go on the DNA code. And cells just use it the same way musicians pick out a sheet music and play it. Cells do that. And what happened was all organisms, so Luca is the last universal common ancestor, all organisms after that, they start speaking the language of DNA. But as a result of that, because there was this tool, there was this instrument or for creativity and expression, um, the organisms had to adapt new ways of being creative, new ways of expressing themselves. The cells had to find new ways of being creative to acquire complexity. So since Luca, DNA became the general main default instrument of translating across all activities for all organisms. So same argument as the sheet music. I haven't changed anything in this. Default mode of life is living physical dynamics. Complexity hits bottlenecks due to catastrophes and decays and too much information. And the way to figure that out and not get into this catastrophe is to externalize it and compress it onto code. So code is not the source of life, it's a way life organizes itself more efficiently. Um, and DNA is not intelligent. Writing is not intelligent. It's you that you are intelligent. You interpret the codes of life, and you new ways of being creativity, new ways of complexifying, new ways of creative expression. Look what happened with DNA. I mean, became the code of life, and all this complexity that we have was as a result of coming up with this novel way of expressing cells coming up with this novel way of expressing themselves and collaborate. Multicellularity wouldn't have happened without the DNA. So all this complexity of life, even though it was reliant on this, but we cannot toss the cells and say just the DNA. It's still life that's primary. So I want to get into a little bit of a uh, more collective way of what does, because we talk about cells using the DNA in this collective way, cells collaborating, interpreting the forms in the DNA. What does that mean for humanity? Because we talked about writing and sheet music, how people started collaborating with each other better. Um, so I've been inspired by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the uh, uh, Jesuit priest, that he has this idea called the noosphere, which he describes as sphere of human thoughts. And he actually picked up on this idea a little bit. And he called humans creations as a sort of heredity-like exteriorization of knowledge. And very similar to this argument, he said that once you externalize living physical dynamics, it leads to enrichment and create cycles that can make humans organize themselves better and complexify better. So this is a quote from Teilhard that I will mention. Everything that accumulates, arranges itself, recurs, and adds to itself, becoming the collective memory of human race. Heredity, primarily chromosomic, became primarily noospheric, transmitted, that is to say, by the surrounding environment. So Teilhard, who had this collective idea of humanity, collective notion of humanity, um, he he started to seeing how humanity starts organizing itself in a collective way is a little bit like the genetic story. It's um, books and pictographs and all human knowledge, the way it's organized, is kind of like how genetics figured out how to organize dynamics and activity. So he had this notion that human dynamics is very organic. So even though you cannot compare cells and DNA to human dynamics, we've seen that that could be dangerous, but he thought that some of the main principles that are in biological world can be applied to cultural dynamics. So exteriorization and enrichment. Um, so now after saying all that, finally the talk is about LLM, so do want to go there. So one person that I've also been inspired with and met a few times, Jaron Lanier is a technologist, and the way he talks about AI is very different than, even though he's deep into tech himself, he works at Microsoft, but he has a view of AI that's pretty refreshing. So first of all, it's a tool, not a creature. It's not this intelligent, independent mind that's gonna take over. It's just a tool. It's a way of working together, collaborating better. Um, innovative form of social collaboration. And what it does, it finds patterns, hidden patterns in our knowledge. It's so finds correlations in activity, useful correlations of activity, rather than a new mind. So think about what LLMs did. They went and surfed the whole human knowledge that was written across books and articles and the internet. And what they crawled the whole across human knowledge. And what they did was they found bits and pieces of redundancies and correlations and insights of how we do things, how we talk, how we communicate with each other, how we do science, and found out about all those cool correlations, useful correlations of human activity, and stored it as this externalized medium, which are LLMs, basically. So, like sheet music, LLMs are externalized compressed forms of live and physical human interactions. If you can think about what they were trained on, it's all our dynamics. They're all our communications and way of going about life. So down there, I borrowed this slide from Terence Deacon. Is shows how complex living and meaningful interactions are happening, and LLMs only inherited the relational structures of that data. So again, what happened with you can think about, especially with the internet, it felt like there was this explosion of information. There was so much data that we couldn't figure out what to do with that much information. Um, and so what happened was this whole big data that's very redundant. Um, so life again can take advantage of this huge amount of information that leads to the complexity bottleneck and catastrophe and decay that we talked about. So it could learn from this big data to organize itself better. So what happened was, similarly, LLMs learned the useful recipes like DNA did for living dynamics. They found the useful recipes of how we go about life and stored it in an externalized compression, compressed medium. Because if you think about like LLMs, even though they're so like they talk that they contain so much knowledge, they actually, if you compare it to actual living dynamics, all that process that's led to books and internet and chats and all that, we found a way to just store the insight from all human knowledge into just one medium. It's pretty remarkable. So, can we call that intelligence? Can we call what AI is doing intelligent? Um, so as we saw with externalized mediums like sheet music and DNA and writing, they weren't, you wouldn't call them intelligent, even the Greeks did when it came around. Intelligence still is what you call intelligence, still physical embodied dynamics of life. That's where meaning comes from. That's where intelligence comes from. Still us. So they're just tools that make our life easier. They help us organize ourselves better, more efficiently. But the default mode is still live human dynamics. But we do have that bias of viewing these externalized mediums as intelligent, as we saw with the Greeks. So, following a similar trajectory as writing and DNA, we saw what they enabled as these tools that help us efficiently learn more about our dynamics and organize ourselves better. So they're becoming instruments of expression and creativity, like writing, like sheet music, um, for humanity. So that last part is important. It's all relative to us. There is not this entity that's coming to take over. It's all for us to use. It's all we are the stewards of creativity and expression. And these tools are there to make us be more efficient. Um, but it has some implications because with all, whenever the writing came around, society had to organize itself to learn how to collaborate now with this new medium. Um, sheet music, I mean, I don't know when sheet music was invented, what was that? We don't know what was that like. It's probably musicians had to go find ways to learn that and express creativity through that new medium. So it takes a little bit of adjustment whenever there is this revolutionary instrument comes around. So it's pretty remarkable to live through that now. Since probably this is the closest humanity has felt to something like this since the invention of writing. So that's pretty special, I would say. So I want to emphasize this slide about new ways of doing creative work. And what does that mean to be a novel instrument for expression and creativity? Because if we can figure out what is the way to work with this medium that's the healthiest for us and the most productive way for humanity to use this tool, instead of stigmatizing it, instead of saying it's bad, don't use it, it's cheating. There's a stigma around it. And there's this divide. There's this almost stressful environment for creativity. You don't know what's authentic anymore. So it's a very stressful environment, I would say, for creativity and expression. But that's what happens when there's a new instrument. We got to learn new ways of working with it. So I want to focus on that last 3 points of the the argument that we sketched early on, opening up new possibility space of creativity and recombination, new ways of creative expression, and new ways of doing collaboration whenever there's a new instrument like that. So what is this new paradigm? What is this new paradigm for LLMs and AI? What does that look like for us? What new skills are emerging as a result of this new instrument? Um, Whenever the piano was invented, like musicians didn't go away, right? They found a way to play the piano. So how do we learn to play this new instrument? So one thing we can observe with all these examples is that when the more mechanical execution and labor are externalized into an instrument like sheet music, writing, if you didn't have those things, you gotta have good memory and like, when the printing press came around, you didn't need people to just keep writing things. Like whenever there's this new efficient way to organize knowledge, if you can like just see the trajectory of what's happened is what becomes more important is you being more creative, is you finding you figuring out what you find more beautiful and tasteful. Whenever you don't have to spend all your time on the more mechanical aspects of your craft, then what remains then is your aesthetics, what you find, what you appreciate, right? So your focus goes from, instead of focusing on the kind of more mechanical aspects, which machines can do, to more human, which is more aesthetics, more beauty, more creativity. And you can think about that with any tool. So this intention-based paradigm, which I'll get more into, and you can think about the whole trajectory of tools that we've created in this sense to organize knowledge better, is going towards having the machine understanding what we mean, not just instructing them to do things. And I'll explain what that means. Um, how many of you have heard of the word or the term vibe coding? Okay, cool. So this is an idea by Andrei Karpathy, AI researcher. And he says there's this new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give into the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. So what vibe coding is building software by just talking to AI with English, with your language, right? And instead of and letting AI handle the technical implementation, right? And just pause. That's really cool, right? Like you can just say, you know, AI, I don't like that corner that's blue. Can you make it purple without writing any code, right? And we can see already in tech interviews, because AI is handling all of the technical aspects of programming, so the interviews are mostly asking people about design questions now, about, oh, what do you find beautiful here? What's a better design for this? Even programmers. So we can see there's a shift from more mechanical coding execution to aesthetics, to beauty. Like even our engineers are, we're finding the skill that's becoming more valuable is what they find beautiful, not this rigid mechanical aspect of coding. I mean, coding doesn't have to be that mechanical, but still, if we can offload the more logical and automated aspect of coding, then what remains is really is for humans to express their unique self and their unique creativity through these mediums. And you can think about it with AI, you can generate so much. We don't have a problem of generativity right now. So it's more about being good judgments of beauty and creativity. Because there's so much variation and beauty, um, it's what the skill that remains then is what is appreciated and what is beautiful. So it's a new skill that we're not quite used to yet, because we're used to thinking generation of something is creativity. And that's why we have that bias with AI, saying AI can be creative. But really, how trends come and go, how art comes and go, it's really the appreciation of it, not the generation of it, that makes something meaningful. So the new skill is figuring out what aesthetically resonates with you. And also think about how AI has learned all human knowledge. So it's going to allow us to recombine ideas from domains, and cultures and generations that would be really hard to combine. And why is that? It's because it's really hard to learn the language of a new field and skill, right? Let's say you have an intuition about Greek philosophy being useful for tackling agriculture, an agricultural problem. Um, someone that, let's say someone is really good at Greek philosophy, but doesn't know anything about agricultural issue, and it's really hard to get into that lingo and go learn about agricultural science. They can just say, teach me about agricultural culture problem in a simple way and recombine how Greek philosophy could solve problems in agriculture. So now we could recombine across human knowledge and across generations. But notice how this process is an extension of what we did with writing, because once we wrote things down, we could go pick up books for different topics and recombine them. But it was a more mechanical process still. With AI, we can do this very efficiently. Or mix different cuisines, mix Mexican food and Italian food. I don't recommend you do that, but you probably wouldn't be good, but you could ask it. And if it's good, then you came up with something cool, by using that. And AI catalyzes collaboration. Why is that? Then, because again, you can translate across domains. If you don't know anything about finance, it would be really hard to get into that 2 years ago. But now with AI, it'd be like, all I know is chemistry. I don't know anything about finance. Can you teach me finance in a chemistry lingo? And AI would do that for you, right? So, and you could go now collaborate with people in finance. So it catalyzes collaboration because it's translating knowledge for us. And also to efficiently recognize value and contributions. This is something Tomas has talked about, Tomas Velos has talked about in his work about pro-social AI and Jaren Lanier that I mentioned earlier. We have an issue with data dignity. And what Jaren means by that is AI has taken all of our knowledge, but nobody got compensated for all that data that went to these systems, and it keeps crawling the internet, put a blog post, YouTube video, gets all that data, charges people $20 a month. You didn't get anything of that. So that's problematic. We should find a way to efficiently recognize people's work and compensate them. And the last image I want to leave you with is human aliveness and creativity is not replaceable. You're not gonna get replaced. AI is not taking over. You're still the creative being, and your aesthetics and creativity, that's what lasts. So instead of saying we're gonna get replaced, instead of saying don't use it, we've got to find new ways of working with a new instrument like this. Yeah, well, thank you so much, and I'd love to take questions and see. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Parham. We have time for questions, lots of time. So anyone wants to begin? Okay. Ramon?
Thank you, right? You said that DNA is not a blueprint. Uh, I think it's partially true. I mean, there is it goes both ways basically, like the way evolution did invent DNA or did evolve towards making the DNA molecule is a compression way that you described, so to store the evolutionary dynamics in a compressed form, but then it's used by the cell afterwards to create all the proteins. So the central dogma is still true. It's still happening. So I think it plays both roles of having compressed evolutionary history, but being a blueprint still for decompressing. So it's a kind of both compressing and decompressing dynamics.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. I think the reversal of the central dogma is more about the evolutionary story, not the developmental story. Because the evolutionary story is that DNA came, RNA, the nucleotide acids, they came first, then the code came first. So the reversal talks to that. And whether you call it, I appreciate that perspective that there's still this blueprint that sets life. But it's I would say what I would emphasize more as to why it's not really a blueprint like a computer code is that cells still collaborate to interpret the codes in life. So it's more, and it requires a complex geometrical and temporal dynamics during development come together and express the DNA at different stages. So even though you could think of that as a sort of a blueprint, it's still a very flexible and chance-driven dynamics. It's not really like a Turing machine. So I would say that's where that's why I like the term recipes. There are all these useful recipes that during development they get used. So whether you want to call that the blueprint, I would say it's just a matter of taste. But
Yeah, okay. The blueprint is probably too rigid.
yeah.
But interestingly, there is also a strong analogy with LLM. So to build an LLM, you need a massive amount of computing that costs millions of dollars, and you need also massive amount of data. But once your LLM is here, then it's easier to, I mean, just inference, getting answers, it's much less costly.
Yeah.
So there is also this dynamics of having compressed humanity's knowledge into very powerful LLMs, and then the users just querying this very powerful model that give us little answers in different contexts, like little recipes, if you want, to solve our problems.
Yeah. Well, the fact that since Luca, all code of life became DNA, I think it's telling, right? That once it was figured out, we didn't let go of it because it was so efficient. And same with LLMs. We can't really go back now once we have a tool like this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question. The intent of my question is for you to play forwards now, a long time into the future. And to give a bit more context to my question, life is 4 billion years old. Intelligent human life, in other words, Homo sapiens, is only 70,000 years old. Sort of modern human with writing and other technology is 5,000 years old. So yeah, the one leg of my question is, where might AI develop over, say, the next 2,000 years? Calculated scale. And to give you a little bit more of a
easy question.
Yeah, I started to give a bit more of a background to what I'm asking you. You start at the beginning with, okay, life was first of all proteins, and then proteins slowly learned how to make a subset of proteins called RNA and DNA. And those are just proteins at the end of the day themselves.
Shapes of proteins, yeah.
So it's all protein. And then because we had from protein to RNA to DNA, we could start to create cellular life, which led to multicellular life, which led to the constellation of cells called human being. If I think of AI, I'm thinking that we may still be really at the beginning, because you have the AI software itself, which is actually running in machine code at the end of the day with a compiler in between. Vibe coding is a new kind, actually just a new kind of compiler. So you have the AI code, and then you have the information, the data. And I wasn't hearing you separate the two out. And I just have the suspicion that if we separate them out, we may be able to see more clearly how this might develop over the next 2,000 years, because I see some kind of pattern. Well, I think there may be a pattern, I can't see it clearly, between protein to DNA and the difference between the protein and DNA leg and life itself, and the code, the content of the LLM itself, and what might come next.
Yeah, good question. Well, I mean, I have different reactions. Like, that's a very good questions. One concept that might be, I mean, I don't want to make any predictions, but I would say there is a concept called major evolutionary transitions. You could think of multicellularity as a major evolutionary transition. And what's interesting about major evolutionary transitions is that they usually have a novel heredity mechanism. So, for example, DNA was a major catalyst for a major evolutionary transition. You could think of like more like eusocial animals and like not fully independent units, but like slime mold and all those things. There is usually a sort of niche construction whenever there is a unit of collective organization. And writing LLMs language is a form of offloaded niche construction that helps us organize ourselves better. But a nuance here is that cells now, like in a multicellular organism, cells cannot just leave the part anymore. They're really dependent on other cells and also the DNA. That's not the case with humans yet. I can just go live in a cave now and be fine. We don't, so that level of probably not for a while, but we can still, so we don't still have that fully coherent, independent collective unit at the level of the globe. So I think what you're saying with the transition into, I would say it's going to lead into more dependence on this technology. And there's this ratchet now that we're tied to. There's not really going back. But what's hopeful here is that biology found a harmonious way, like cells and DNA are not really fighting, they're not really in competition. There's this harmony in life. So I'm hoping that the same way that we found harmony with writing, Greeks were really freaked out about writing, but we're fine with writing now. I'm hoping we could find that harmonious relationship with writing and with AI as well.
Isn't writing something to make it asynchronous so that you can give information not directly to somebody else, but after a while he can interpret and read it?
Yes.
It's not to have the dialogue, it's an asynchronous dialogue. So if there are agents creating LLM, but then the software who's interpreting the LLM there is intelligence, the interpretation of it, and how it can learn. So it's not more about learning. If AI can learn by myself, then you have a kind of human AI. And the next question is on how do you approach that with ethics? We'll talk about ethical.
Yeah.
But how can that be somehow be available for working with AI, that it also interprets ethics?
Yeah.
How can it create ethics?
Yeah.
At this moment, not, I think.
And that's a great point. I mean, we talked about new ways of creative Sure. Yes. So I think you're asking about what's the ethical dimension of working with AI. And I would say that's a good point because I emphasize the new ways of being creative and new ways of expression, but also we need a new framework for ethics whenever there is a new tool like this, to make sure, so data dignity that I mentioned, I think that's an ethical dimension of this technology, because with writing, it's really, even though you can, but once there's a book and there's an author on it, you know who wrote that book, and it's easy to recognize that and compensate that person. AI gets your data and then you're lost in the process, but your knowledge is still in there. That's very unethical, I would say. So we should find a way to recognize contributions and meaningfully compensate people who are contributing to it. So that's one ethical dimension I can think of now. Yes.
Well, I very much liked your approach, the idea that AI is a kind of an exteriorization of part of our intelligence, meaning that it is a new medium to express knowledge and insight, which can be more easily manipulated, just like sheet music is more easily manipulated than live music. I think that's a very important aspect, but also, as you said, there is still the human judgment that then is needed. I mean, anything can be written in sheet music, but there are good pieces and there are bad pieces of sheet music. The fact that somebody writes a book does not mean that that person is saying anything wise or anything positive. So there is still the judgment of the one who interprets that externalized information. So what you spoke about aesthetic judgment, I would want to generalize it, and I would say it's a general value judgment, which includes aesthetic, but which also includes ethics, which includes what I would call wisdom. And the wisdom you get by interacting with the world. And that's something that the AI at the moment doesn't do, because it is indeed an exteriorized form of human wisdom. But the humans are still the ones that will then decide on, is this particular exteriorization a good one or a bad one? Can have the AI generate something. But then I think the biggest now contribution that humans will have to be is to judge about what is the good output of the AI, what is the less good one. And that is, I think, where humans still are the most important ones in selecting all the possible things that AI can generate and selecting the good ones and the bad ones. So I think that is a very important contribution there that people tend to overlook, because AI can generate things that look good no matter what, but among all these things that look good, some are really good and some are not so good. And what you call aesthetic judgment is one way to capture this notion that intuitively we can see the difference between a good work of art and something that's just an imitation of a good work of art. And we need to better develop that ability of fine-graded judgment based on intuition, aesthetics, ethics, wisdom. That's the tricky part, and that is what we will need to develop most, I think.
Yeah, I very much agree. I very much agree. Yes, yes.
Good. Raise your hands back. Microphone. Yeah. This. No, wait, let's say.
Yes, Cedric.
Yeah.
I was interested in the last slide you had right before this. Okay, maybe the one before actually. Yes. So it's about contributions and data dignity, right? And we have in Europe the GDPR that protects some of our personal data. Do you think that we should aim to go further than GDPR when it comes to the way that data is used? For instance, social media is using your data to just capture your attention, right? And I'm wondering if you would advise for a specific framework, not just a legal or an ethical framework, but also a technical implementation of this ethical and legal paradigm that we're trying to live in regards to AI using data.
Yeah. You're specifically talking about basically what regulations we need to have when it comes to AI using our data. Is that?
Exactly. Like we have regulations that are being created in Europe, and we have ethical North Star in a way, right? Like we're trying to get this data to serve us and not us being in service of data and AI. And I'm asking more about technical framework. What would be a good technical implementation so that it would translate and embody the physical, the philosophical preferences that we have as well?
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, I can think of one thing. Like there's the Perplexity app, and what I like about that is there's more. It's source references more of the sources, and I think. What I don't like, I mean, we're still in a weird paradigm now that the companies are trying to advertise this as a new mind. And a new mind really doesn't reference other people. It's a new mind, right? So I think we should just go ahead and mention where things are coming from, and find sophisticated ways of attribution, I would say, when it comes to people and sources. And forget about this new intelligent mind, and just it's a medium that involves as Francis was saying, it involves our thinking and our thoughts. So we should just be transparent where these thoughts came from. That'd be the more natural way.
The problem is that many of these thoughts are collective in the sense that you can't attribute it
Yeah,
to anyone.
yeah, that's true. At the best we can. Yeah, that's
We'll give one source, there might be 10, right? And I think it solves half of the equation, which is finding, who wrote it. One of the humans that wrote it maybe before machine did, but it doesn't solve that 90% of the traffic is AI scraping and getting trained, right? And how do you not just cite like, hey, I actually included a link to your page, but properly value the contributions.
Yeah.
Those websites, blogs, articles.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying that, made me think of like book footnotes. Not the reference section, sorry, the reference section at the end. Like, that's very interesting, right? Like, you read a book and there are all these numbers, and you can go at the end, see where these came from. We figure out a way with writing. It's trickier with AI because it's a statistical abstract. It's more abstract. So I think you're right. It's a technical issue that definitely we got to figure out how to do that the most ethical and also intuitive way that doesn't also overdo it. Yeah, it's an open question.
Before Olga, sorry, before you come in, I have to, because the organizer in the US is sending a message to saying I have to jump off in a moment, but wanted to follow up on Francis' response about judging the value of art through intuition and a developed sense of aesthetics. As a writer and teacher of writing, I see that those who have already developed a strong craft as a writer are well positioned to judge good writing from AI. Those, for example, young students who are still learning are not so effective in making these judgments. How do we foster such judgment if, as future generations, don't learn to write or create without AI? So that's the question. How do we keep the craft of? Yeah, thank you, Sheila. We will discuss it. If you need to go, we are very happy here. We will continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great talk. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So we can maybe go through it because it's going to be kept in the recording. I think it was on you. How do we keep that?
On me.
How? Yeah, he was commenting on your point.
Well, I wish I had a simple answer, but I remember one of the things that I liked in the work of Abraham Maslow was that he was saying that one of the differences between a wise person and a less wise person is that the wise person has a good taste. That's a person who, when going into a museum and seeing lots of different paintings, can distinguish which are the really good paintings. And you can say that's subjective, but his point was it's not that subjective. Usually history after a while shows that Beethoven was really a good composer, and maybe more recently the Beatles were really good. That was objectively good, and we learn these tastes. And one way to learn to do that is to see lots of examples of both good and bad writing, or both good and bad ideas. And yeah, I think it's one of the typically human things that you learn the judgment by experiencing, by lots of interaction, not by some rules. Because if it was a simple rule, then you could tell the AI to do it for you.
If I can comment a little bit, because just very briefly only, the thing is that the knowledge that the AI can acquire as a compressed externalized medium misses the dynamics, misses except from what it captures, misses all the rest. So I think that the game, the obvious answer is by fostering the other aspect. And as you said, what is the LLM missing? And we all agree, I mean, we all know this, it misses the playful experience, which is embodied, like the embodied personal experience through the world, to the unknown, to whatever. And it also, I will dare to say that it also misses the ability to practice things as we do, for example, like when we dance or when we go to learn martial arts, you know, this practice of doing things or building, I don't know, like cups or things, people like to do those things, or yoga, you know, all these activities that are through the body, through practice, LLM cannot do. And also they cannot lose themselves in the streets of Brussels. They can't, you know. So I mean, the answer must be somewhere there. And I think education actually should foster more this type of actions rather than the actions of watching a screen and learning letters and doing because LLMs are already, we compress that thing out, you know.
Well, I just mentioned that's why decompression is important. And what is decompression is really filling in the gaps that were lost during the compression. But the decompression work is a very embodied, energetic human work. And if you play an instrument, you know, when you start playing a piece, you're really decompressing it because the composer had these complex emotions and thoughts and aesthetics around the piece. When you pick up your guitar and play that sheet music, you're decompressing um, the forms in the sheet music, but importantly, you're decompressing it with your emotional and aesthetic judgment. So you're filling in the gaps with your own thinking. Yeah.
So we continue the round. I think you were next.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
next. I
please.
wanted to hear all the.
Yeah, Olga, please.
So I will try to repeat.
Well, that's right. Yeah, you were on.
So the point was about, I recall the context, data dignity and the European system of rules about data privacy and your argument about the Perplexity Act, which I would like to support because Perplexity, this is the only AI agent I would say I know for now, where you actually can use any available AI model, so you can jump between Gemini, between GPT, 4, 5, or 3 models, and it's already a very big revolution in like kind of democracy of AI use, because we know that, for example, Claude is good for image generation. Gemini is good for this sort. So we end up in 1 year, in a few years, to like paying $20 per month for each of these apps. This is like, this is not really right thing. And what Perplexity did, kind of combined everything and make this democracy. This is the first, I think, technological like approach which was used in a good way to benefit users. And the second with the sources is it's less psychology, like as psychologists, like GPT, for example, like, yeah, you're right, or I'm really sorry to hear it. It's very precise, so it gives you really sources. And I think for them it would be a next step to count the sources they use for the queries of users and then report it. And I think this is more or less would be an ideal technological construct which would be available for users. So I think that Perplexity made like really a lot of progress towards an ideal and compromise and democratical AI platform.
No, that's a good point. I appreciate what they did early on with references and things like that. They really broke the taboo and like shifted from the whole there's a new intelligent being to the wait, this is just a tool that you could use, like writing. And the point about I really appreciate that they are introducing different models you could choose, but and at the same time, I think a step further than that is to merge the knowledge of them in a response to get some sort of wisdom of the crowd effect, because they do that. Oh, great. Yeah.
Either the best model for Perplexity, like choose based on your query, which AI agent they should use, or you do it by yourself because you have some preference.
Sure. So the point, the model that I was proposing is, you know how there are biases, like for example, DeepSeek, the Chinese model, wouldn't answer some political questions or things like that. So what could happen is once you ask a political question, um, the the system crawls 5 models, and if 4 of them are saying one thing and one of them is not, you probably want to go with the four that are saying the thing. So that's the wisdom of the crowd argument. So I think it could help with biases in models too. Yeah.
That whether I don't know the technological algorithm behind their best model, but some few times I really switched by myself because I wanted someone. But all the sources which Complexity did, and I checked them manually, they all were correct. So much better than GPT at least.
Great.
I would be surprised that it does multi-query to the multiple models because it would be extremely costly. Each time it would multiply the cost of the search.
I do they have algorithm for compression.
There are
I think what they do probably is they analyze the query and then they route it to one of the models that they think is best in math or in biology or.
Yeah, but they also need to do the constant work to know based on which query to which model they should send the query.
Yeah, that I don't know.
But there are services that do that. They like query different models. You obviously have to pay for it, and then like create like an overall general. I don't know how good that is. Like experimented with it. There's so many versions, right? I think. Can I take over, or do you finish?
Thank you. I finished. Yeah.
Thanks. I think it's like very interesting optic where the one where we see like information and function like somewhat separated, right? That you were mentioning, I believe. I found it very interesting, like this separation and this focus on the blueprint and what is like the intelligent layer, and I wonder whether so you have models of knowledge production philosophy, creative process, and one of the ways to think about knowledge is the Redian model, like the relational, distributed, embodied, and material, right? And I think it would be very interesting as a thought experiment to see intelligence as like distributed over all of these layers. Because I do not like to take sides, and I think when we think of like the selfish gene as opposed to the traditional model, for me, these are just lenses, and the real question is, what do I want to do with this mental model? Like, where does it take me? In a way. So you're talking about the selfish gene, and I was thinking of the selfish meme. The meme existed long before it became an internet thing, and it's a unit of culture, like it's a cultural artifact in a way. And there are like memeplexes that are like clouds of semantic connotations that make sense when taken together. So if we think of all of the music sheet that I really like as an example, as I never thought about it, is that we just streamline the creation of cultural artifacts, then and we extrapolate that to writing and to the creation of computer and so on. Then I wonder whether streamlining the creation of ideas, streamlining the function that creates ideas, which to me is inference, calling artificial intelligence intelligence. It's a bit of a pet peeve of mine.
Oh yeah.
I don't know whether we know what intelligent is. We have psychometric models, methods to measure, to have proxies for intelligence, right? And humanly, we have an intuition for what intelligence is. I think it's one of those constructs that is similar to consciousness in a way. And yeah, I wonder what the results long term will be of streamlining the function that creates ideas. Because I see myself using like several models at the same time, different repositories, like Gemini CLI, Cloud Code, and Codex next to each other, and then at the same time while they're working on my code, then I use another chatbot to create a blog article, and I see that I move further and further along the meta project management dimension as I become more comfortable with these tools, and I find out what they can do.
Yeah.
In terms of context, indeed, you can connect a chatbot to like 5, 6 MCPs and give it ownership over all of your code, all of your computer, and all of your like cloud repository, Google Drive, and so on, which compensates a little bit for that lack of embodied material dimension. But yeah, what will be the long-term consequences of this type of idea streamlining?
Yeah.
In a little bit on what MCP is and all that, so we all understand the question because it's a little technical.
Yeah. So now that LLMs became a thing, but we realized don't have context, we found ways of delegating the burden of creating connections to the LLM to the service provider. So you can have a server provider, you can have like a cloud provider such as like Google Drive,
You can have like a data provider that gives you data about your LinkedIn connections. Instead of Anthropic, of OpenAI, of Google, creating a connectors for each of these service providers can simply create an endpoint that the AI can connect to. So the AI provider only has to think about creating a general connector to these MCPs, and I create my service, which is to create events about philosophy and AI. I create an MCP that all of the other AIs can. So this is a way to like just make it have your inference processes relevant to the work you're doing by connecting it to different services. That's a little bit.
I like that. So it's sort of from what I'm picking up is like personalization of LLM, that you've taken it to a specific phase space with your own thinking and work, and sort of allowing other people to get into the space you've created it and use it that way. Is that basically the?
Interesting idea. I think that's more like that has more to do with like embeddings and semantic space, because you also have like these as a consideration on the function aspect. Like we don't know what these things are doing, right?
Yeah.
Probabilistic in nature, and there were methods 5-10 years ago that looked at the covariance inside a convolutional network to understand how to steer this convolutional network in directions that we want. And style transfer was one of the precursor of that. And Anthropic now is doing similar things to understand really deeply inside of what is it that happens. From an ethical perspective, I think this is really important, because the Chinese models, yes, do not say some things, but the American models also follow a political agenda. Now, it's mostly a political agenda that we share to a degree, but it might not be the case 3-4 years ago in the future.
Yeah.
Situation.
Yeah, I was talking. Tomas and I were talking earlier. I think we first made the point about how do we decide what model to pick, and like all these like habits we develop around AI use. I feel like personalization is the way to go. There should be a way, which is also a technical issue, of the framework, whatever the interface is, learning more about your habits and kind of adapting to your way of working. So I think personalization might be one of the answers to a more coherent interface.
Next question. I think we got.
Was just to react on.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
Do you know? Thank you. MCP, I think, can be used for personalization, but in order to understand them a little better, I think it's nice to see them like as an API for LLMs. And if you don't know what an API is, I think the explanation from Michael was really good, that it's a connector. So instead of the normal LLM, you give it text and it gives text back, right? And when you connect MCPs to an LLM, you can give text, and then the LLM will find the name on the internet and then create a mailing list and then send 15 emails, and then connects to a different application, generate a video, and then post the video on LinkedIn. And all of this the LLM can do with you just sending a text. Because you connect your LLM with many MCPs to many different applications. Each MCP can be an MCP of a different applications. And as Michael said, the burden of development is on the size of the application itself. So LinkedIn needs to push an MCP, and then your LLM can connect to it. And so it can be used for personalization, but I think more than anything, the MCPs are used for automation, right? And that's what is saving a lot of time from people at the moment. Is not the LLM itself, but it's really the MCPs that can then automate a lot of the administrative tasks and the repetitive, boring tasks. Because then you just connect sort of your repetitive task to the LLM, and it can do it at scale.
Yeah.
And the second question I wanted to, not really question, the point what I wanted to transfer in the question about the embodiment. Do you think that robotics will allow LLM to kind of have this embodied experience? To then have the sensory life of, hey, I'm walking, I'm dancing, I'm seeing humans, I'm being in a crowd.
No, great question. I think that's a subtle point. Not any form of embodiment is meaningful and intelligent, right? Like if I just create a robot and put the computer chip in and it's dancing, doesn't mean there's somebody home, you know? So biology and what you call cognition is a very specific form of embodiment. And it's very unique. And I think emerging theories in biology are moving towards saying that metabolic systems are unique. There is value in metabolic systems that you can't really get if you just create an embodied robot. So the point is not much having physicality, but there is a very specific logic to life that we haven't quite yet figured out what that biological logic is. We're getting closer. And I feel like then there would be a new science of actually creating intelligent embodied systems. I don't think it's impossible. I think once we figure out how life did it, there is nothing stopping us from going there. But what AI is really is not that. It's really it's a form of externalization at the end of the day. And if I just put LLM into a chip and put it into a robot body and or taxi or bartender, doesn't mean it's an intelligent being now just because it's embodied. So that's a subtle point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I leave the floor to Clotilde.
Yeah, please.
It's not as deep, but my question was, first of all, I really like this metaphor between all these medias. And my question is about, did I forget my question? No, it's about this ethical points that we were talking about. Like, if I think about a writer, for instance, of course, in its book, it can say, oh, as the author, blah, 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 said X, Y, Z in his book, can do it, but it can also not do it, whether consciously or unconsciously. But like, even if I write something, maybe there is some reminiscence of whatever book I've read in the past, and I'm not aware of that. So my question is, why should it be different with the LLMs actually? Like, it would make sense to me if since you talked about this metaphor that we're never going to get some ethical done, so to speak, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, one thing I would add that even if you forgot where you got it from, you probably still bought the book or you paid to read the article somewhere. So if there was really a way of attribution to the original thinker that you came across, even though you forget, we probably should have had a system where if that knowledge got to you, the person that came up with it, if that was their purpose with it, that was their work, they got compensated. But I think, yeah, that's the challenge with especially the recombination idea, because really novel things arise out of the recombination, and it's really hard to keep track of where things come from. So I think it's still a technical issue too. So I think there should be a way to automate this process, so you as the user can focus on creativity instead of always have in the back of your mind, where did this come from? How should I? So I think referencing, I think automation of referencing would be an interesting point to explore as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Questions? Let me give you before. So to de-incentivize more questions, just to de-incentivize, after the question round, we will have the fridge there with beers. You can have a beer. So, and we continue the discussion after the questions. So more questions?
Please.
Just one, which I think is a very important one. You gave the example of DNA becoming a kind of a discrete, well-defined list of instructions for this complex dynamic system that is the cell. I don't think we're there yet with AI, in the sense that the AI models now with deep learning they learn things, but they're not discrete, they're not well defined, they're very fuzzy, they can't explain where their knowledge comes from. What you would ideally would like is an AI that develops models of the world that are to some degree discrete, that have clear concepts, clear rules. The good old-fashioned AI was like that. We can't go back to that state, but we could go back to a state where the neural networks can to some degree justify their reasoning and put things into components. This and this together lead me to this and this. That's a stage where we are not yet. And I think that will need to be one of the next big steps in AI. That means making the connection between the purely distributed neural form of intelligence and the more semantic form of intelligence, where you can justify what are the elements of the reasonings, what is the reality you're speaking about, giving some kind of a structured explanation instead of just a collection of words, where each time you ask the same question, you get a different collection of words, and all the words seem plausibly to follow the one from the other, but you can't really subdivide it in logical components.
Yeah. The explainable AI?
The explainable AI, yes, but it's more than explainable AI. It's an AI developing an actual model of the world and not just a model of text that generates more text.
Yeah, I'm a little conflicted on this one because when I think of the DNA, it's very abstract, you know, I mean, and, you know, the logic with regulatory networks and things like that, like spliceosome, you know, DNA gets cut and combined, like there is this aspect that it has this abstraction, and it's a very small, I mean, it's not that like, compared to the complexity that arises in life, like DNA molecule is a very small, that's what's impressive about it. But then it's the recombination, splicing, and regulatory network that leads to the complexity. Don't you consider DNA as abstract and not discrete, or do you consider DNA?
Well, the DNA is discrete. It's very clearly discrete. There are codons of 4 bases.
Okay, in that sense, okay.
And just like sheet music is discrete. The music itself is not discrete. The music, as you say, it needs to be decompressed. But the compression itself is useful because it makes it much easier to analyze, to recombine. As you say, you can take some notes from one melody and combine them with notes from another melody. But for that, you need to have a discrete representation. And that's something we don't have yet
that makes sense.
in the LLMs.
That's a good point, because now with all these other mediums, they're still physical. You know, DNA is still physical, sheet music, writing. This aspect of LLMs being digital is different. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
This is what they call the knowledge graphs. And most people think that when this is developed, we will reach artificial general intelligence. That's the promise of many companies today.
Oh, okay.
Just to and because it's the material, virtual still, but materialization of all that thinking is like a sort of semantic graph that is structured. You can query, and it's not going to be question dependent. It's just you can see it, analyze it.
Yeah.
Companies are doing marketing about AI.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
No, but it's one of the big unsolved problems. I think lots of people know that this is a problem that needs to be solved eventually. And at the moment, we don't need it because people usually, when they ask a question to an LLM, don't want to have a logically structured answer. They are happy if they have something that sounds plausible. Eventually, if you want to do, for example, scientific research, you would like to have an exact reasoning where all the elements are. And
you have this to some degree with all the models that have the chain of thought process. So it's not a recapitulation of the overall logic, but it traces back how the LLM gives you the answer, and you have the chain of thought.
Yeah, but these are approximate answers. They're not like a semantic network or a knowledge graph where you have well-defined categories.
Are excellent in mathematics. They're
because they like some people call it stochastic parrots, yes, they are kind of parroting
No, but-
mathematics text.
no.
They're not really analyzing things.
And when they solve medal field level kind of problems, it's extremely impressive. It's not a statistical
No, but
parrot
the
can do that.
point
It's more
is
than
that
that.
because of the context window, like the associative thing can only reach, let's say, what for humans will be episodic memory. They can go through episodes and be very smart through the episode, but they cannot have an integrated worldview yet.
Yeah,
That's what you can only store in a knowledge graph.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
so
yeah.
that's the core, the issue. And nobody knows what mathematical structure is
Yeah.
underlying this. You know, the Cliff Jocelyn was saying like hypergraphs that point to themselves, and it's Ben Goertzer has a
I have an idea
Yeah.
to develop this kind of graph.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm going to write stuff down in
Make
the
a
paper
conference
now.
on that.
So yeah.
What is the structure of the underlying structure of worldviews?
Yeah.
So Orion, I think you yeah.
Actually, the discussion, as a philosopher, the discussion remind me of the very difficult discussion we have in philosophy of science, looking for a physicalistic language to translate and to have the real knowledge and wisdom. And then that time, in the beginning of the 20th century, they spoke about objectivity, and he didn't use this notion so far. Is it that kind of language that we are looking for? And then another thing I would like to bring in is the metaphor that, or the analogy that you used with music. The first PhD in the arts in Flanders was in 2007 by a musician, Bartolt Kuiken, a traverso player. And the title of his PhD was "The Notation is Not the Music."
Wow.
So, and then he started explaining that it can be a discrete and a very nice way of transfer knowledge, but actually the music is different and is an embodied practice. But at the same time, he was an expert in trying to play the music as close as the original music was played that time. He was playing Bach. And he called it historical informed practice. So studying the context and also using the old instruments to come as close as possible to the practice of that time.
Yeah.
So is it this practice that you are looking for, to come as close as possible to, let me call it wisdom, or the model of the world, or objectivity, or whatever? And a final thing I'm going to add is, and it's also from very traditional philosophy and philosophy of science, is the crisis of European sciences, written in 1936 by Edmund Husserl, who was actually coming up with the idea that if we are looking at translating the world, the life world, into a scientific language and building up a scientific world, we become alienated from the life world. And actually, this is what he called the crisis, because people start to believe that the real world is the mathematical world and the world of sciences, forgetting that the real world is the embodied world, like dancing, eating, tasting, drinking a beer, and so on. So my question actually is, what actually are we looking for if we are building this tool?
Yeah. Great questions. I love that thesis, the name of that thesis. Yeah, I mean, first I will say that your question about what's the end goal with interpreting an externalized medium, right? I would say getting close to the original is one interpretation. It's just one of them, right? Maybe I want to translate Bach into rock music and play with electric guitar. That's my interpretation of that sheet music. What was that?
Jethro Tull has done it yesterday.
Oh, it's similar. Okay, yeah, exactly. So I would say they're different. And one way, I think there are contexts where that can become not good when you take it too literally. And that's religious texts. You know, we see what happens when people take religious texts too literally. You get ISIS, you know. So there is this oral tradition when it comes to religion, interpretation, and that's what keeps it healthy and normative. So I would say interpretation is crucial when it comes to like constitution and religious text. So I think that's the danger with actually externalization. You can lose context and you could misinterpret it, or you could interpret it too literally, but that's dangerous. So I think with arts is more flexible, but we got to make sure whenever there's a constitution or religious text, just realize it is a compression and it's up to interpretation, and it's an ongoing living thing, and we got to keep interpreting it with our own context to fill in the parts that we're missing in our own context, not just the context back then. So I think there is that dangers. I would say it's a double-edged sword. When you externalize, it can be this efficient, cool tool where you can explore yourself, express yourself better, and share your work. But also, it's rigid. You know, it's up to misinterpretation. So I would say. And your last question was about it was similar, you know.
Was the crisis of artificial intelligence in this case,
Yeah.
referring to the crisis of European sciences, that the philosopher said, well, people start to think that the artificial world is the real
Oh,
world,
yes, yes.
and we are alienated from the live world. But the question is, maybe it's fine. Maybe it's fine to live in a second world, or
yeah,
or in I don't know.
There is a saying in our generation, it's touch grass when that happens too much.
You know, there is this anecdote that Keanu Reeves talks about. He was invited to the house of his director, his friend, and he has a daughter that hasn't seen the movie. So Keanu Reeves, Neo in the Matrix, explains the struggle of Neo in distinguishing what is the Matrix and what is the real world, right? And he finishes it telling her, and then she looks at him, Gen Z, young woman, like adolescent, asking, "Why does it matter?" It's like becoming like increasingly.
Well, we are living in our own mental model. It's cultural, it's individual. My interpretation can be because I'm that kind of person, and somebody else is from the same reality. There's another perception. There's also another mental model. So everybody has his own mental model, has his own artificial life, if you want. It's an interpretation of what physically is going on.
Yeah, but the effect of the having too much digital life are disastrous. More psychological background, and there are more and more studies that prove that social media are one of the worst things that happened in the century, and it's really destroyed mankind.
Yeah, okay, but because people are interpreting the social media. If you are critical, then you say, "Oh, that's bullshit." And if you're not critical, then you accept it and you create your own world.
But this comes back to this.
Yourself from the world. You just stay inside in front of the screen instead of interacting with people. That's
You can read a book. You can read a book. You can talk to people.
It's not just critical thinking. It's a drug, and it's also a machine that produces anger to create engagement. Right? It's just the psychological levers that are used by social media by design and nefarious in order to capture your time and your attention and turn it into profit. And I think this is what you may have as much critical as you want. It's still a machine that is designed to extract from you, right? And I'm not saying this in like a happy, naive, communistic language. I'm just saying that there are like scientific papers that are published on how to hook people better, right? And like a few percentage that makes you not just check 20 minutes, but have like a binge of 4 hours on the phone. And then you're like, oh shit, that happened. And even with the best critical thinking you want, then you're gonna just be shown articles that fit your liking. articles about critical thinking, this in this country and whatnot, and then your attention is captured in this spot through ads.
That's not critical thinking.
Exactly.
No.
That was actually a bit of my question. Now we've been I mean, we have here a panel of people who are basically pro AI, don't be afraid of AI. And at the beginning, you have this list of questions, what people think, oh, it's going to
Yes.
You're going to lose all of our jobs, AGI is going to take over, et cetera, et cetera. We know the world is not black and white. AI is not just positive. So what would be, according to you, the more plausible negative impacts? I'm thinking now of what he says, social media gives you things, feeds you stuff that you already believe in. It's just confirmation bias. AI kind of, it actually does the same unless you ask it not to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, great question.
Psychosis.
Yeah. I mean, you can think about writing too. Is that whenever there's a medium like this, even though it increases creativity, it also increases deception. With AI, it's easier to fool yourself, get into take it to these spaces where it's just not part of reality. Just take it to places and have it confirm whatever you could literally engineer to do that. So I like the concept of medium is the message. Is the Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan means the medium that you're working with has profound effects on how you think and experience. It's not just the content. So what AI, and it's the case with any of these externalizations, you're opening up the possibility space. And the possibility space can have good sides as well as the bad sides. So it's very true that with the new invention of this new instrument, even though it opened up creativity and expression, it also opened new ways of deception, lying.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. Sorry. Okay, sorry. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, so once the possibility space is opened up, even though there are new creative ways you could go, also the creative ways could be bad, could be not healthy for you. And it also opens up the space for deception and manipulation. And it's a good question that what are some ways we could kind of protect ourselves against that? I would say education, I would say telling people it's an intelligent mind is the worst thing you could do. Because then they consider, oh, it's intelligence. Whatever it's telling me must be right. Instead of, let's frame it, guys, it's just a tool for creativity. And it's a tool for you to meaningfully express yourselves. But you got to remember, it's still you that you have to have the judgment of that shouldn't go away. Whatever you see on the screen is not necessarily right. So that's like, and critical thinking in general. It's a very crucial skill that I think should be taught at school with any sort of writing. Yeah.
Use questions of how do you use this tool?
Yeah, well, it's ethical and critical. I mean, you gotta have critical thinking with anything, and as the tools become complex, our education of critical thinking needs to also get ramped up. You cannot just rely on previous.
I would like to get back to your example of fundamentalist religion. The origin of the religions we know now, they are in scriptures, and scriptures were about the first written things And they were at that moment, they were like the AI of that moment. The Bible was like the AI of the moment, a new medium to express wisdom in. And so people took it so literally that whatever was written in the Bible was like the word of God. If you read the Bible, it's as if you're speaking to God. We are doing the same now with AI. So the fact that the medium is new is very impressive, and therefore you're inclined to put it on a pedestal and to look up at it, and that's what fundamentalists do. If it's in the Quran, if it's in the Bible, then it's the word of God. No, it's just written text that was wise by the people who wrote it then, but yeah, you take it literally.
Well, that's spot on. There's a book I really love, this Sensuous Manifold by David Abram. He talks about writing. And he talks about how like native people, when they saw, they describe it as talking leaves. That's how they describe writing. And they associate this magical effect of writing. It's so crazy to think about written text, written words had that effect on people who first came across it. So I think we have this bias to whenever there's a new medium to say it's intelligent, and it's happening with AI too. Yeah.
Want to I had so many questions ago.
We're considering doing like a short break, get a drink, and then we do this fishbowl methodology. I don't know if you know fishbowl. So we have 4 chairs. We start discussing, and we can kind of claim, and someone has to leave. So someone comes in, so we can all be like discussing. So thanks again, Parham. Big clap for you. And so here we end the transmission. So thank you, Parham. Okay, so goodbye to people online, and see you on YouTube.
They're not joining people.
No, it's on there.